The biggest responsibility for me in leader is to ensure that promises keep on working on time.
ProCognita, Get Agile podcast.
Making reliable promises. Interview with Angel Diaz-Maroto.
Hi, and welcome to Get Agile podcast. We're back with live recording now from Warsaw. I'm with Angel Diaz-Maroto. Yay, I made your surname correctly. Hoo-hoo. So we are in Warsaw with at the Certified Agile Leadership class, which you're running here, by the way. We're gonna touch on the leadership because what I know from the conversation before is that you've been helping the companies in 40 countries.
Yeah.
Right. So let's have a conversation about the leadership. Agile leadership was, from your perspective, what is the biggest challenge for the leader? Let's start this way.
Mm-hmm. Well, rather than the biggest challenge, I would say the biggest responsibility. Challenges there are many. It depends on the context. The biggest responsibility for me in leader is to ensure that promises keep on working on time. So that means that once there is a commitment, when it is clear, what is the direction, what is this representation of the future, and where we decide to pursue and achieve, there are a lot of promises in the way, or a lot of promises that should be committed to and promises that should be fulfilled. So the ability of a leader to ensure that those promises are clear and that are working on time is critical to ensure results in organizations. And that is true for any kind of leader. In an agile environment, when we need to understand how the context is changing and how to adapt to those changes, the promises are more dynamic. So being able to create and being able to ensure that those promises that are going to be more broad still work on time is even more challenging. So it's a responsibility that is part of being a leader and becomes more demanding in an agile environment. That's why the leader should be very good doing this and should have an informed instrument to make that happen.
Before we look into those instruments, promises, can you define what you mean by the promises?
Yeah, exactly. Well, a promise is a commitment that is understood, that is articulated, so it's clear for both that they are participating in the promise, and somebody saying yes to this request. So it's an articulated request, and somebody understands and say yes. Then becomes a promise.
Okay, so can you give a specific example of the promise?
Well, actually, an example of a promise is sprint planning itself. So in sprint planning, there is a request from a product owner. There is a sprint goal. There is a request that should be, of course, understood and should be accepted for a counterpart, which is in this time the Scrum team itself, or particularly developers. So when developers understand what is this scope, understand what is this request, this is when the promise can be built. And it has different components. So one of the components is a clear representation of the future. So we understand what is the sprint goal. We understand why this is important. Why should we care? What is the business value we are bringing if we complete this sprint goal? Then we need clear conditions of satisfaction. So understanding how do we know that we actually got there? And a specific conversation in which the people actually committed to deliver, that is going to commit, they say yes, and this is turned into a promise. For this promise to work, also we need clear limits. That means a time limit, which is a sprint itself, a clear representation of who is the executor, so who is committing, this time is the Scrum team, and who is the client, so who is this going to be served by this goal to be achieved. So who are the stakeholders that I need to communicate as a team member to understand I'm going in the right direction. On top of that, we need to ensure that the team has the ability, and that's why we have Scrum Masters. So the team should understand that we have the ability to achieve what we committed to. And this means to have the knowledge, this means to have the capabilities, the instruments, the time available for making that happen, and not being stole from those instruments. So of course you are not going to steal the computer for a developer, because the developer can develop the software, but you might steal time by saying, okay, now you have to also do this stuff. So of course it needs to be very clear that those instruments are needed and not going to be taken away from the developers that are committed. And the third one is the maturity. So the team should be there in that position before this first commitment. I mean, if the team never committed at sprint goal level, they don't have the maturity, you need to support them first. So they know how is it like to commit at that level, to self-organize so that they can distribute the work and actually perform as it was expected in the planning. So this is one example of a very well-structured promise that has high probability of being fulfilled, which is actually a proper planning with a mature team and with a good refinement. So it's understood, it's clear, and is committed.
Okay, before we move forward, I just want to make sure for people, some of you who are watching us, you can see a lot of stuff on the wall behind us. It's not just the promise or the commitment on the team level, it's not just for the Scrum team, it's on the all level, just example from the Scrum team, which you can guys relate. Two things you have said. First of all, you said that it's critical for the leader. So why this is critical from your perspective? Because it's what you say sounds pretty simple. I know it's not, but it sounds pretty simple. So why is it critical from your perspective?
Well, it's very easy. You can't have a relationship with someone that you don't trust. You can't work with people that you don't trust. And you trust people that demonstrated with facts that they fulfill their promises. So if you manage as a leader to create an environment in which people fulfill their promises in a constant and continuous way, you create a trustworthy environment. So yes, we want the self-organized team, but on top of that, we want the teams to be impeccable. That means when they promise, they actually deliver, so that we can trust them. In the moment in which you can trust them because they demonstrated with facts that they can deliver, in that moment, the environment is actually working in the way we want. And that really also, or generates also the culture we want, a culture or trust, a culture of responsibility, a culture of commitment, a culture of impeccability. So if the leaders manage to create that environment, that would lead to results. And therefore, this purpose that is the leader pursuing, which is having an organization that is actually capable to deliver, capable to understand the customer, capable to respond in consequence to these changes in the customer behavior, which is agility, will be working. So that's why everything, like one thing leads to the other. So when the leader manages to create a culture in which we deliver and we understand the customer and respond in consequences, agility becomes true in the organization.
Okay, so it sounds for me more like creating the organization when you can make promise, or it's so it sounds like for me like
creating the organization you can trust.
Yeah. Okay. So because it seems like the making the promise is the end of the long path together. Because if you think about it, like if you have even if I have a team or a manager or anyone in my team that cannot make a promise because of the external dependencies, whatever. I have a team and they need to ask for everything in the organization. Well, I cannot tell them to make a promise, they can make a promise, they're not going to deliver. How much is this, coming from their being depending on the other teams and other people in the organization? How it comes from not having a responsibility in those people, right?
Actually, that's why it's very important to know how to properly articulate a promise. So I cannot promise that it is not going to rain tomorrow. Yeah. The same way I cannot promise that you will be satisfied, but I can promise that I will do my best to, together with you, build something that is getting progressively closer to your needs. Yeah? So which is different than properly articulated promises. That's what I'm saying, which is when we promise at task level, it's very simple. Yeah, I will move this rock from right to left, and this is something that I can promise. But when we are talking about a complex environment, we're talking about understanding the customer and changing as they change in behavior, the promise is broadened. The promise is different. The promise needs a different type of relationship and therefore needs a better articulation. Yeah? If we say we are going to build a shopping cart, yeah, we can't promise that we are going to build a shopping cart. I cannot promise that you're going to like that shopping cart. Yeah? So that's different between a non-properly articulated promise, which is I'm going to build something that you like, yeah? Or I'm going to build something and together with you, we're going to decide soon if you like it or not.
On the other hand, we want to have a shopping cart that the customer likes and they start buying, so the outcome, right?
Even better, right? So we are going to discover together what is the best version of the shopping cart so that the customer likes it.
All right, so how do you make the promise in this case? Like, we don't know how the customer is going to behave. Most likely they're going to behave the other way we think they're going to behave. So most likely they don't like what we think they will like. And how do you make a promise in this case?
Well, remember that in front of a request, there are two possible answers. Yes and no, or counteroffer, which is I can promise I can deliver a shopping cart. I cannot promise that the customer is going to like it, but I can promise you that we are going to check together with the customer if they like or don't like. And after that, with that feedback, we can make a second promise, which is doing the second iteration. That's why I said in Scrum, for example, we have a promise every sprint that we don't promise that the customer is going to like or the stakeholder feedback is going to be always positive. We promise that we're going to deliver an increment and we're going to evaluate that later. So that's a promise that is coherent, because we are in charge of the variables. Yeah. So this is one example.
Okay, so this is something we can, as we mentioned before, this is something you can work on the team level. This is something you can work on the senior management level. Maybe it's a good idea to look at the senior management level, like a CXO level, trying to work with the team or with the team of manager or team of leaders. Now, how do you create this environment? So how do you make sure that those promises are being treated as promise, right? So we know we promise to deliver to deadline. We know that we won't deliver, but it's okay because we know I'm not delivering in this organization to deadline anyway, right? Pretty common, I would say.
Yeah, actually, in exactly the same level can work in a board of directors. So when the CEO say, okay, I want you to promise me that we are going to increase our EBITDA by 50% during this year. It's a plausible promise. Yeah? Can you promise that? No. This is a non-articulated promise because there are a lot of variables that they are not in my hand. But I can promise that I can do everything is in my hands to run initiatives or to create initiatives that are in this direction and give you feedback as soon as possible. So I cannot promise the 50% EBITDA increase, but I can promise different initiatives or different experiments that can get us to understand in which direction should we walk in order to get closer to that. So that's a more properly articulated. Yeah? I can promise you this 20 initiatives, 30 initiatives, checking the result of those initiatives in the meantime, but the 50% we're going to discover together.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is like if you think about objective or something you, I believe, call more like a purpose, then I cannot promise to meet this one, but I can promise to make the next step toward the objective. This is
Exactly.
what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so if you think about from the OKR perspective, it's like, we're gonna wanna do the next step to move into the right direction, but we're not quite sure if it's gonna work for us.
Exactly. So if we want to compare the structure of a promise with the OKRs, we can say that it's a representation of the goal. It's just the goal. Okay, it's like this is the objective. I'm going to work in this direction. The conditions of satisfactions are the KRs. So if the KRs are okay, that means we'll reach there, right? And I know there are some limits for that. It should be clear how much budget, how much time, if there is any regulations to consider, who is the executor, who is the customer. Then on the other side, do we have the abilities, do we have the instruments, do we have the maturity, do we know what we are committing to? And then walking in that direction. And we can say, well, according to the information we have so far, we can reach this objective in a plausible way, because the good things about OKRs, they are shorter in time, they're in 1 quarter, and they're plausible to be achieved. And the fact that you're good at building promises and are fulfilling promises doesn't mean that you never fail. So you can fail and be impeccable. When you know they are going to fail, you inform as soon as possible and you do something to correct it. So to repair as soon as possible if damage was created, and correct as soon as possible so you can actually achieve or reconfigure the promise into something that you can achieve. So that's impeccability, which is not about never failing, but about taking responsibility when you see that you're going to fail and restructure the promise.
Which is kind of interesting, because if you think about the OKRs, they can be kind of challenging goals. So if you meet all the OKRs at the end of the quarter, then basically, you put the level so low that you can just, walk over it, right?
I have to say I strongly disagree with that perspective. That can even be too stressful and frustrating for people. It's like it can be to me, and this is my subjective interpretation, even a way to force a constantly, an environment in which we constantly break promises and we constantly lie, right?
Okay.
So this perspective of point to the stars so we'll reach the moon, it doesn't work for everyone.
Okay.
So it works for some people that they are naturally more driven for results and they are achievers and they are they are more achievement oriented and fighters. There are some people that prefer more structure, or they are more planners, that are more calm, and they might feel very stressed in those environments. It can be very frustrating for these people to see over and over how they can't reach those OKRs.
So that will be kind of depending on the type of organization.
Depending on the people. There's different people. Might be so. Some people you put them in very stressful targets, and that motivates them and moving them forward. And I have to say, that in my experience, that has an expiry date. Yeah. So if you do that too much, you can burn people out. And there are some of the people that feel really uncomfortable under those type of situations. So on the other side, I see from experience that when people are actually achieving targets, and they see this, they have this feeling of progression, yeah, and it motivates many people, right? It's very similar to what happened with games. If the games is too challenging, it might be frustrating, and very few people will still keep on playing when it's extremely difficult. On the other side, of course, if it's too easy, it might be also boring and people might get relaxed. So if we want a state of flow, we want to find a sweet spot, a sweet spot where it's challenging but it's achievable, yeah, and they are and the promises can be fulfilled in a sustained way. If once I break, once I pointed towards 50 and I got 40 and I inform and I corrected, that's perfect. But if every time is the same, it can be very, very frustrating. So that's why I disagree with this.
Yeah, remind me, I just recently reread the Deadline by Tony DeMarco book, and what he's saying there is like have a challenging goals but have a realistic schedule. So which is kind of interesting conversation. I believe that's gonna be longer than this podcast. Sorry guys, we're gonna go back to the promises. If you wanna have this conversation, to listen to this conversation, the longer conversation about the goals is like ask us for a beer or something. So let's go back. You talk about the promises. You talk about this let's say framework for promises, whatever to call it. Mm-hmm. Now, what I'm still missing is how do you move from the we have an organization, we're not sure if we're going to meet any promises, like we're making the promises which are not being met or whatever. So like a pretty common organization, I would say. Mm-hmm. How do we move to this direction? So if I'm a leader, I see that there are promises which are not being met. Like every single sprint we fail. Like every promise that I'm hearing from my leaders is like a promise, just a promise. And the reality then, just before the deadline, I just learned that the deadline is not gonna be met again. How do we do that?
Well, there actually might be several reasons that generate that environment. One is because they are not promises, they are expectations, which is different. When the promise, somebody understood and said yes. A leader should be able to understand when the people are committing, knowing what they are committing to. You have to, as a leader, you need to read people when they say, yes, I commit and I understand and I go in that direction, I have the maturity, I've been there already, I'm committing because I understand and I know, and it's a plausible approach, the one I'm using, so most probably it's going to be fulfilled. The thing is, from the leader's perspective, how to put attention, how to get people to put attention on that. The first is to understand what are the costs. So what cost is the company paying due to this kind of culture of continuously failing promises, commitments that are not clear, and the price is often in untrustworthy environments. Yeah. So, and this involves waste, a lot of waste, and distrust, and then it's very, very, very difficult to work in such environment, and also frustrating.
Who do you show this to? Like a senior leader, those people who you want to be committed?
I would say everyone. So everyone is feeling the effects on this. So for a team member, it's frustrating because you can't trust your colleagues and you are being forced to lie. From a management perspective, it's frustrating because they are not achieving the result they expect from the team. From a top management perspective, it's even more frustrating and dangerous because you see how there will be a high rotation, people will leave the company, and you're still not achieving the result you expect. So everyone should be aware of the cost so that someone would step forward, up to the plate and take responsibility and make something to change, right? So this is the first step. The second step, once someone understands the importance of doing this, we should start creating progressively coherent promises. Usually when we break the promises, it's because the promises are too broad or too vague, or they are forced into someone. Yeah. So if we don't know how to fulfill promises that are goal-based, maybe better, we need to first learn how to fulfill promises backlog item-based or task-based temporarily, and then progressively learn how to take a broader level of responsibility. This is how you help a kid to mature. It's not that you have a 5-year-old kid, you give the credit card and you say, go buy dinner. Yeah, go to a restaurant and buy dinner. You would never do that. But maybe you're 5 years old, you will give a coin and say, okay, buy bread there in front of our house because you already been there with me and you know the person in the store, and you can ask for the bread because you see me doing it and I was doing that with you before. So I can generate that maturity. So in the same level you have to do with your organization, with your team. You have to progressively build this maturity in an informed way. Otherwise, assume the cost of not having that, which is very high.
Yeah, so the one thing that's just came to my mind, this is like about growing the maturity of the team or in the leader in this case. So like who need to learn to give those money? Like if the parent is not giving the money to 18 years old, it's like it's a problem of the parent, I believe, not the kid in this case. So I believe that you might have a situation when the team never had a potentially chance to make this commitment, because someone was making a decision for them for the last 20 years. You may have a situation when the manager never was allowed to, never allowing the team to make this commitment, right?
Well, to dance tango, you need two people, yeah? And somebody needs to start an invite and say, you want to dance, yeah? So who should start? The thing is, the one who starts is the one who decides that the cost is too high. Yeah, it can be a manager and say, okay, the cost of continuing this situation is very high, so I need an instrument, I need to create this maturity. Yeah? What is the alternative? Complain and saying that the team is not mature. Yeah? Or the other way around, I'm a team member and I see the effects of not having any accountability, any responsibility, and being frustrated and I work in a repeatable environment when I repeatedly break my promises. And I might step up and have a conversation with the leader and say, look, we have to solve the situation because I don't want to work this way. So somebody needs to step up and decide and say, hey, do you want to dance to this game? You want to play this game? You want to dance? So both decide, yes, let's move towards this, and we can start working on making that happen. Yeah. What is the?
Just gonna put one point here is like so it may not be clear before. Is like you don't need to be a manager to be a leader in this case, right? So you don't need to you don't need to be promoted to the C level to start doing this one. Just for people who are listening to us, just to make clear you can do this as well.
Yeah, exactly. A leader is someone who has influence in the system, and you don't need to be appointed as such. You just need to have influence instruments, right? And the ability to show what is the cost of the current culture, the current negative effect in the environment we work, is actually a leadership instrument. It's the same way that is articulating a promise. So to articulate a promise, you don't need to be the Scrum Master or the Product Owner. You need to be someone who is aware and willing to care about this and open the conversation in a structured way.
So the promise is the tool, coming back to what we started the conversation, that promise is the tool for the leader, no matter where you are in the organization, I believe.
Exactly. And a promise happen on several levels and within the organization, between different departments, between peers, between a Scrum Master and a Product Owner, or Scrum Master and a team, because between stakeholders and teams, between a Board of Director member and the CEO, so on and so forth. There are a lot of promises. So at the end of the day, in an organization, there are a lot of relationships working at the same time. And we can't base our relationships on expectations. So what do you expect from my team, or what do you expect from my boss? I can expect my boss to help me, I can expect my team to be proactive, but what does that help? What does help means? Or what does proactivity means? So we cannot base just these relationships in expectations. So we should be able to turn those into promises. And the difference is very clear. We agreed, we articulate, we know what we expect from each other. And now that we understand, we commit to work in that direction. And again, that doesn't mean that we're not failing. But if we see we are failing, we're going to inform fast. And we're going to correct that situation as soon as possible. It's about being responsible. It's about creating an environment in which relationships are working. This is why this is so important. And you don't need to be a leader to have that skill. Actually, everyone must have this skill if they want to participate in an environment that is impeccable and that actually is achieving results and is actually a nice place to interact in and to work in. Otherwise, that would lead into a lot of gossiping, complaining. My boss said this, the team says that, they don't want to do this, they are resist to change, they do this, they do that. And this is actually huge waste in an organization. We really don't want that to happen.
Yeah, you said it a little bit already, but I'm just gonna close us with like tips and tricks for those promises. So what you would say to avoid? We get some examples before, but maybe you get a few more, and you know how to make them perfect or better than we used to have it.
So what I usually have in mind, I have a small framework that looks like triangle. So in the top is the goal. The goal should be clear. That means clear representation of the future and understood by everyone that is participating in promise. Conditions of satisfaction. So how do we know that we got there? The goal should be relevant. People should care. If they don't care, they're not going to pursue it, for sure. And people should have understood and say yes. If there is no yes in the conversation, but a yes that involves understanding, this is not going to work. So this is the first element in mind. The second element, as we said before, is the limits. So we should have a clear limits of our context. That means how much budget we spend, or what resources, devices, regulations we need to comply with. So like this is the boundaries that are going to be around this promise and can be affecting this promise, and how much time do we have for the promise. This is the second element, the limits. And the third element is the abilities. So are people able to promise, to fulfill their promise, this promise? And to be able, first, you need the instruments. I would say the instruments means, again, the computer, the time is available, the empowerment needed is available. The second is the knowledge. So they know the technology, they know the organization, they had a conversation with the stakeholders or whoever would say details that are needed to solve this problem and to achieve this goal. And the third one, as we said before, the maturity. That means I've been there before, but with some help or with some guidance. Yeah. So I know what I'm promises because I've been there. Yeah, because if we promise, for example, I can be very courageous and say, yes, I promise you I will climb a mountain, but I never did it before. Most probably I will be surprised in the journey. So we can accept promises if that person been there before with some help, with some support. Otherwise, we need to make the promise shrink to something that is more achievable. Right? I would say before, can you promise me the 50% increase in the EBITDA? Well, not really. We have to decrease a little bit that promise so it's more coherent. So with that in mind, I actually will ask the audience to test this. If you can remember any promise that you've seen broken in your work environment, try to analyze which of these elements were not properly established. Most probably you will find several of them that you could improve for the next time. So once this triangle is clear, for a person that is willing to help others hold a promise, and also for a person that is holding a promise with himself or herself, you need to keep in mind that it's important to, in any moment in which you see this triangle being broken, as soon as possible, inform, repair, and correct, so it doesn't happen again. Breaking a promise is normal. If you do it once, the same type of promise, if you do continuously break the same type of promise, it's not normal. Yeah, so if we are breaking promises and we repair and correct, so it doesn't happen again that we break these kind of promises, we progressively become more and more trustworthy, which is the ultimate goal, become more trustworthy. Yeah. So I think this is a tip that will help the audience. Having this in mind, when they see that it's being broken, a promise is being broken, they analyze what is failing, what of these pieces, these three pieces in the triangle is failing, and how to fix those so it doesn't happen again.
I know that you can learn this one on the CAL training. The question is, do you have any other resources except for the book that's going to happen sooner or later? It's going to be in Spanish, so not all the audience from our podcast can find the book or read the book. So any other place you would recommend for those people to look into this topic?
Definitely. So many things that I will include in my book, the book that I'm writing, and that are part of this training, the Certified Agile Leadership class, comes from Fred Kaufman, Conscious Business. It's a super good book. And also from his second book, Revolution of Meaning. So Fred Kaufman is a must to me, it's an inspiration to me.
And we're going to put those links into the description of the video, so you can find it there probably.
And the second inspiration is Bob Duhan. He has a line of thought that is called generative leadership. Even though he didn't publish a book yet, as far as I know, I had the pleasure to hire and work together with Natalia Cordova, which is an Argentinian psychologist and coach, and she mentored me for 2 years, and also analyzing and helping me on reviewing everything that I teach in this class and everything that is going to be in my book. So she's a psychologist and researcher that was supporting me with this, and she put me in knowledge of Bob Duhan's work.
All right, thanks for this conversation. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for watching us. If you like the conversation, you want to hear more about our conversation, just subscribe us, and see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. See you next time.
To learn more, visit procognita.com/getagile.